Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 260, where we're going to be talking about how to gamify your marketing using different assets. Gamifying your marketing is one of the many ways to increase engagement for your audience, but people usually don't think about how this can be done using different products. That's why today we have Shawn of HyperKinetic Studios to discuss how he took their game and adapted it to a comic, providing two standalone products that organically cross-promote each other, creating a super value-packed experience for both players and readers. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Shawn from HyperKinetic Studios. Shawn, how's it going, man?
Going great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, same here, and we're definitely glad to have you. So, Shawn, could you please just take a moment and share with us what you do at HyperKinetic Studios, what kind of like games and things that you guys do there, and also, if you don't mind, just share a little bit of things that you do in your personal life, specifically like hobbies or fun things that you like to do outside of work.
Sure. I'm a writer for HyperKinetic Studios. I'm mostly doing video games. I'm the lead writer of our RPG Epic Tavern, which is in early access now and available on Steam.
Cool.
I'm also writing the upcoming comic book adaptation, Tales from the Fantastical Crimes Unit, which it shelves in Halloween from Scout Comics. So that's coming right up.
Awesome.
And before I get into game work, it really took me 40 years to kind of break into games. So I tried a little bit of everything before that. I was a newspaper editor for years. I wrote and directed a movie called The Wrong House. I made another comic series, Escape from Jesus Island. So I'd kind of bounced around the indie ranks in a bunch of different, genres and mediums, trying to kind of find my foothold before eventually getting back to where I always wanted to work, which is games.
Awesome.
So for like hobby kind of stuff, I've got this terrible habit where I ruin all of my hobbies by doing them professionally. It's like I know that it's going to happen, and I still keep leading into it. Editing comics. I edit maybe 50 comics a year, mostly through Scout.
Oh wow, okay.
And the process of editing comics has completely ruined my ability to just read a comic for fun. Because my eyes go into editor mode where I just kind of like zoom in and I'm on each line word by word, I can't just like absorb it for fun because I'm paranoid that I'm going to miss something. Live sports is another thing I used to love, but then I spent 4 years as a newspaper sports editor where I'm on the sidelines and dodging bodies. I filmed mixed martial arts from a cage mounted stand where you got to like lean back to avoid punches. And you can't watch sports from the stands after that. It's just what do you. So I've kind of even movies, which I love. I was a film critic for years, and that kind of diminished my joy of that a little bit by oversaturation. So I've got this bad habit with hobbies. Fortunately, games have held up. They're the one thing that there's so much complexity to them that even with my natural inclination to overanalyze everything, I'll never reach the bottom of games. There's so much depth there. There's so much to study. So I don't feel like I'm ever going to burn myself out on that the way that I tend to with all my other hobbies.
Wow. And I think that's a good point, and why I think games is so, because it's funny the whole thing that you shared about the film thing, because I was a film major, went to film school and did some of that, and then after that, like to an extent, it's hard. You're right. It's hard to like when you study things or do things for so frequently, and then you go to try to watch or enjoy that medium, you start analyzing things and you're missing out on the key aspects. You're like, oh, like for example, oh, that wasn't in the previous shot. Like, you're still looking at all those things that way. So, but yeah, with games, and that's the thing I love about games too, is just there's so much depth, like you said, that like you can try to overanalyze things, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna burn myself out, and there's no point. I'm just gonna enjoy it for what it is. So cool, man.
Yeah, and then and the thing is, when you get in this kind of muscle memory built up of taking notes while experiencing a certain thing, whether it's a sporting event or watching a movie, it just kind of wrecks your brain. Because then when you're not doing it, you feel like you're missing something. Like you feel like there's a part of the process you're supposed to be doing, but I don't need to take notes when I watch a movie anymore. So it's not helpful. But my brain still feels like I'm supposed to be doing it.
Oh, okay. Wow. But you know what? I mean, hey, that's probably one of your superpowers, right? Like in where you can really use it as a strength sometime. And in some instances, it's just inconvenient, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's some of both. You obviously learn a lot by over-analyzing a ton of different mediums and that sort of stuff. I mean, there's real advantages to it. But strictly from a fan standpoint, it can, you can kind of tank yourself by overexposure sometimes.
Definitely. Well, in a moment, we're definitely going to get into analyzing some stuff because, especially today with this topic we're going to be discussing, which I'll share with everybody in a minute. It's just something just really cool and love to dig into. But before we do that, I'd love to go into a little bit more about you by putting you through the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box round is just simply a series of random questions I prepared for Shawn here. And, Shawn, are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite comic of all time?
For a series, I would say the 80s era Savage Sword of Conan. I was 11 years old when Conan came out. I was exactly the right age to be just fully sucked in by it, and I just absorbed anything I could get from that story world. For a single issue, oddly, I'm going to go with Mad Magazine 227, which they did a parody. It was a horror movie parody called Arbor Day. And it was playing on the 80s movie tropes, where, Friday the 13th and Halloween and every holiday has its own horror movie. And it was just, a goofy play on that. But it came out when I was 10 years old. And it was the first time that I think I truly comprehended the whole idea of parody. And that you could tell a comedy story in the shape of a horror story, and that the juxtaposition between the two genres would create comedy. That the clash between these two things that you're doing added value. And that story was really the first time it clicked for me. And I started doing stand-up comedy at 16. And in a weird way, I think that particular Mad Magazine issue sort of lit that fuse.
Wow, that's really cool. Like that realization from that particular magazine. And it's interesting you bring that up too, because for a lot of people who may not be familiar with this, in terms of, I think, delivery on some things, I'm thinking movie terms, and I'm sure the same could be found in comics. Comedy and horror actually have a lot of similarities with each other in terms of execution and stuff. So,
well, they totally do. Yeah, it's being comedy. The act of eliciting a laugh from someone is a combination of it's a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise from what was anticipated. And the horror movie is almost the opposite.
Yep.
It's the same experience. It's the surprise from what you anticipate. It's the variance from what you thought was going to happen that creates the moment, but it plays it in a different way. But it's very much the same dynamic. And obviously, horror and comedy play really well together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's really cool. All right, next. What's your favorite anime of all time?
It's very different from what I think is the best anime of all time.
Okay.
But I'd go with Death Note, the 2006.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the recent one, but what the original did that I loved and that I always love in stories is that it engaged my imagination about how I would handle that situation. And I love stories that do that. They kind of pull you into it and make you sort of start storytelling it yourself in your own head.
And on top of it, there's a whole ethics aspect, like
right?
Is awesome. I remember watching that and getting wicked into it, and it's been inspiration for other things too. So cool. Let's see. Name one country you always wanted to travel to.
Let's go with Narnia. The thing that always bothered me about those books is that the kids were just so lame. And if they ended up as royalty, I could be running that place in a month. Narnia is ripe for conquering.
Fair enough. And especially if you're referencing at all I think the original BBC television series ones, because that was brutal.
Yeah.
Like
if they ended up royalty, I think I'd probably fare pretty well there.
Early bird or night owl?
By choice, I'd be a night owl, but I'm forced to be an early bird by two dogs. Like all things equal, 2 a.m. is kind of when I like to crash. Also got in this habit of the last couple of years that I think is really valuable, in that I try to spend the last hour before I go to bed every day laughing.
That's awesome.
So I do like an hour of comedy podcast like right before bed, and I think that's just like a nice kind of getting your head in a good state before drifting off to sleep.
I would take that as one of our tips for today, folks, because putting yourself in a good state of mind before you go to bed is always a good thing. And Shawn here has a good one, I think, to maybe follow or be similar to that, which is laugh before you go to sleep.
Well, especially if you have a brain like mine that's written a lot of horror stories. And, my brain isn't the kind of neighborhood you want to be walking around in at night. So if I can kind of turn a few extra streetlights on by laughing right before I go to bed, that's advantageous.
That's a good analogy. And then last but not least, the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing right now?
I'm actually replaying XCOM 2 War of the Chosen for probably the 5th time right now. But the running game, the thing that I've played the most I'm 50 years old. So I've been playing Madden for as long as it's existed. I've always been playing a franchise of Madden. And 20 years ago, when I met my wife and her 3 kids, I also met my stepson, and now stepson Robert, who is 10 years old and loved Madden. And my problem with the game was always that I would smash everybody. I'd played the game for as long as it's existed. I played every iteration of it, and I would just, murder anyone who played against me. So my project with Robert was to just create a monster, was to teach him all of my tricks. And that anytime I beat him on a deep pass, I would pause the game, show him the replay, and show him the read that I made that made me read that. And then I would never catch him on it again because he would adjust so quickly. And now he's 30 years old. We still have a running Madden franchise. We always do. We're about 7 seasons into our current one. And we're now tied 3-3 on Super Bowls. I've built him into this monster who smashes me regularly now. So I have to keep getting better just to keep up.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. It's been a great experiment. And it was so fun starting off, when he was young, because the draft process was kind of overly complicated. It's a little hard to parse. So what I would do is I would put together every season these 50, 60 page scouting books where I would go through the entire upcoming draft class and write in kind of plain language a little bio for each of the players based on what we knew about their stats and everything. And he'd do all his drafting based on that. So it's just been a wonderful experience to be able to share that with somebody over the course of 20 years.
Yeah.
And watch him evolve into a player who can just beat the snot out of me on a regular basis now. It's great.
Yeah, that is awesome. I mean, just to be able to from one, just to connect with him on that level, and two, to actually have a fair opponent. So.
Right. Yeah. I often wonder if I went too far in that direction. That I shouldn't have held back a couple secrets.
There you go. Well, thank you again for giving us a little bit more insight about yourself and doing the Q box round. But now let's get right into the topic here, and which is basically we're going to be discussing how to gamify your marketing. And I want to provide a little context here because, gamification in itself is kind of the process of keeping people engaged through somewhat gaming mechanics and things like that. And also in particular with what we're going to be talking about too is the use of gamifying other assets. And I know here on the show I've talked about assets before as primarily being media assets or creative assets like videos or images, but in this case I'm actually referring it to more, I guess, in a financial term sense, where an asset is something that can also create revenue for you, or a product, if you will. So just to clarify there. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about, is how to gamify your marketing with that context. And The other thing I want to share before we kick off with our first question is what we're going to be talking about today is, as Shawn earlier mentioned about him in comics and stuff. Well, Epic Tavern, the game, from HyperKinetic Studios, also had a comic book to go with it. And that's the asset and everything we're kind of focusing this conversation around, and how they used gamification within this asset. So I just wanted to give that top context there, because I think it provides a good frame for leading us into this discussion. So to kick off our question here, I want to go back to talking a little bit about gamification, because at the core, this is essentially what everything's about regarding the comic, regarding the game. And it's something that I would say a lot of developers may like to strive for, but it can become a little bit too ambitious sometimes. What would you say is a good place for developers to start if they want to keep their audience engaged through gamification?
Yeah, well, there are different, very, very different types of gamification. And I think it mostly comes down to intent, at least from the way I look at it. Gamifying a process to extract additional money from the audience is a very different thing than gamifying a process to add value to the player experience.
Yep.
Players know the difference, and if you're only doing the former, that's apt to rub them the wrong way. So our approach was always to entirely focus on adding value to the player experience by making the comic more interactive. And one of the ways we did that was we built this elaborate puzzle into the game and comic that requires both of them to solve. So you can follow a series of clues from the comic into the game that tells you where to look in the comic for the next clues, that tells you what to do in the game next to unlock a secret ending to the Flaming Gate storyline. And, I'm old enough to remember Sword Quest on the Atari, which was this game and companion comic with like a real world puzzle that, you had to find the item, and it was actually hidden. And as best we can tell, that hasn't been done since the Atari. I haven't been able to find any other examples of a comic game crossover puzzle, which seems really weird, because it's this cool concept that sort of got left behind for no apparent reason. So we're bringing it back. But my big problem with Sword Quest is that, and that I was dead set on avoiding with ours, is that neither the game nor the comic for Sword Quest was the slightest bit enjoyable on its own. It was just a vessel for the puzzle. Yep. They made no effort to stand alone. The game was terrible. The comic was, super bare bones and just there to, give you the ciphers you need to solve and stuff. And I really wanted to avoid that. So the way I did it is to ensure that I didn't stumble into that trap, was that I didn't even design our puzzle until after the entire issue was written and drawn.
Okay.
Then I built it in out of existing pieces so that I, could head off the temptation to shoehorn something in that, is only there for puzzle reasons.
Yeah. I want to say too that I really like how you let in that because with saying, reasons for like gamification, especially in the context of, like I mentioned earlier, as an asset, but boiling it down to intent and value. So even if some things may come off, to put in the more general sense, if they may come off too ambitious, if you look at those two things, how am I want to do this, but I don't want it to be ambitious or whatever, or get out of hand. What's a good way to kind of like set my framework, and approaching it from what you said, intent and value perspective is what I would recommend too, is definitely the way to go. Because once you get into like money aspects and all those other things, like, oh, it's something else we can create revenue from and everything else, that sounds great. But like you said, players are savvy. They'll pick up on that stuff. So I love that you led in with that aspect.
Yeah, and it's a question of, are you giving something to the player through your gamification, or are you extracting something from them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely good way to look at it. Well, thank you for kicking that off. And I want to kind of now go into kind of like the strategy of this, because again, it's pretty interesting. When you guys were looking at, different ways to market Epic Tavern, How did the idea for creating the comic for the game come about? Now, you mentioned about, I'm sorry, I forget the title, but the Atari game with the comic. But was there anything
Sword
else
Quest.
out? Sword Quest, thank you. Was there anything outside of Sword Quest that kind of gave you that idea, outside of the idea of it, okay, no one's ever done this before, but what other factors came into play?
It was really a question of just being open to opportunities that presented themselves. Because, I've been making comics on the side for years. And I edit a bunch of comics through the Black Caravan imprint of Scout Comics, which is like this imprint that focuses on horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. And I had this kind of standing distribution offer from them, as well as a front row seat to see how their books were performing on the market. So I was confident that we could at least make back, our investment. So I brought the idea to HyperKinetic to adapt Epic Tavern into a comic. And, after a bit of back and forth and number crunching, they gave me the green light to, kind of assemble a team and make it happen. So it wasn't a thing that we were organically looking to do or looking to do from the start. It was just that while working with Black Caravan, I saw an opportunity space. So I brought it to my studio, and, they're flexible and savvy enough to be open to new unorthodox ideas, and they were all in.
That's cool. And I like too how it was more from, because I know sometimes like people may come up with ideas similar to a comic or some other medium to kind of use as a means to, whether it's creating awareness or providing value or whatever the case may be. They might look at it just from, maybe those standpoints or not necessarily think about the other aspects of it. But you're looking at it from a not just a creative standpoint in terms of creatively doing something different outside of the norm, but you're also looking at, probably what other opportunities existed, and based off of your background and other things, those things started to kind of present themselves. So probably a good thing to look at it was there too. You guys didn't simply just, or you didn't come out and just pitch this out of the blue. The opportunities have presented themselves. So maybe it's a good thing to take away in terms of, well, see what like opportunities present themselves before just saying, wow, this sounds awesome, let's do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I had been working on Epic Tavern full time for 4 years before I pitched the comic.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that it's a cool idea, we should find a way to make it work. It's that I liked the idea years ago, and I was just watching and waiting for, an opportunity that I could be fully confident I could go to the company with this and have it be successful. And it took, almost 4 years for that opportunity to come up. And it was because I was editing through Black Caravan and, just the opportunity space presented itself.
Nice. Now, outside of the opportunities and everything else from that perspective, to me, it seems like the player base for Epic Tavern definitely had some overlap, or at least some affinity with the audiences that are, interested in comics. And I'm just curious, what was the process like to determine if this was the case, if there was that overlap in audiences between the game and the comic?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. We're certainly hoping that's the case, but our approach was actually to not rely on it.
Okay.
And instead create a comic that could succeed on its own. So that someone who doesn't play video games and has never even heard of Epic Tavern could still really enjoy the comic. We didn't want it to just be an extension of the game that's only enjoyable to players of the game. And I was confident that with the setting we had and the stories we had, that we could make a comic that could be entirely successful on its own, even without the game tie-in. So I always treated it as less of a straight adaptation and more of a comic set into the story world of Epic Tavern. And I think that's a key distinction. Here's how I look at it. If I'm walking through a comic book shop and I see a Warhammer comic on the shelf, if I don't play Warhammer, my eyes just keep moving. My eyes just continue on to the next book. I've just mentally categorized that at a glance as not for me, So we didn't want to tether the comic and the game too tightly together, and in the process alienate the vast majority of potential readers who don't play our indie game. So the key was obviously we hope there's overlap, and there definitely seems to be overlap. There's been a lot of interest from our players about the game, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't dependent on that, and that the comic was its own thing.
Yeah, and again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a moment ago, whereas like, talking about the opportunities and such, but also I think it's good approaching it from the way you did, because having having that two separate essentially entities and being dependent on them on their own, just I think really helps focus on providing that much more value. Again, because
Yes.
and I love how you structured everything based around one more time, and I will remember the Atari game you mentioned.
Sword Quest.
Thank you, Sword Quest. Because again, that was really a sticking point to not do that. And again, it still comes down to value and intent, because even without knowing for sure if those audiences overlapped or whatever, well, the comic, and I'm sure possibly the game to some extent, can serve as a means to kind of like cross promote. That really wasn't the focus. It was just still providing a single entity experience that provides great value, and then also has the ability to cross promote, not leading with the cross promotion now.
Yes, because when you lead with cross promotion, you alienate anybody who doesn't care about the game.
Right.
That's really the thing.
Or vice versa.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, we were low enough risk that we didn't have to face a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yep.
We were coming out with through a comic imprint that's already successful. It has a fan base. There are people who buy all the Black Caravan books. So we were in a situation where, I knew we were going to succeed to some degree. It was just a question of, maybe we come up $1,000 short, maybe we make a few thousand on it, but it wasn't going to be a big amount of money one way or another.
Yep.
So we didn't have to compromise the quality of the comic to try and extract every bit of promotional value out of it. That was never our approach.
Yep. No, and yeah, definitely a good one to go, because again, it goes back to the whole intent and value aspect.
Right.
So, I obviously at the beginning of this project and everything, the game was the main focus, and obviously, as you shared with us already, the game and the comic had to be treated as separate projects. And I was just curious, because again, I'm trying to speak to anybody who's looking to possibly do something like this in the future or whatever. What type of resources were devoted to each project? And did they have like separate marketing plans, campaigns, and things like that?
Yeah. HyperKinetic gave me free reign to basically assemble a team and basically make the comic as a side project. They provided valuable feedback on the script and concept art and a budget, obviously, which helps. But the creative decisions, were mine to make. For better or worse, this is always going to be my baby, and I knew that going in. And that leads to a tremendous amount of, self-applied pressure, to reward their trust and make a great comic, which, fortunately now we've done. And man, we got this sent off to press yesterday, and I could not love this issue more. It is just top to bottom the highest quality execution that has ever existed of one of my stories. It's just I'm madly in love with it. I can't wait till we can share it with everyone. So what we did is I basically, we didn't want to take any studio resources because we didn't want to slow down development of the game on anything. So I just kind of built everything on the side and kind of put together a team of people that either I've worked with before or I knew through the comic book world. The first one was Steve Mardo, who's our main artist, and he's phenomenal. I mean, if you look up Tales from the FCU, just Google it, look up some of the images there. His artwork is just amazing, and his character designs are so good, which is super important for a fantasy story. And Steve had somehow never really landed a book that could fully showcase his talents. So this is kind of a win-win for him. He'd been looking for a good opportunity that had some real meat to sink his teeth into, and and Black Caravan's publisher Joe Schmalke had raved about Marta to me. He said, "This guy's great. You should really look at him." And he kind of put him on my radar, and that's become the best partnership ever. I mean, Marta and I are like brothers now. And then the next big piece of the puzzle was coloring. And for that, we got Steve Levine, who did the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So, 10-year-old me, in retrospect, is geeking out in the background with the knowledge that I'm working with the Turtles guy. So Steve colored the original series, but he also did most of the early merchandising artwork, so that when people picture the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the image they're usually conjuring up is like what was on the lunchboxes and T-shirts and that sort of stuff, and that was all Levine. He did almost all that stuff. So bringing on someone who is just this master of color and has this wonderful, vibrant style to kind of bring this to life was the best call. It just took everything to a whole new level. So basically, everyone but me at HyperKinetic just continued on with business as usual while I put this thing together on the side.
Nice. And you were the writer for the game anyways, correct? Or one of the...
Yes.
Okay. So a few things I want to call out here that I think are great one is first off, you said we didn't want to take resources from the main project, which was definitely the game. I mean, yes, you had a budget allocated for the comic and everything, but for the game. And then and I think that's important because clearly at the end of the day, the focus is still the development of the game.
And it's important that the players and readers know that too. That they don't think that we have taken our attention off from getting out of early access while we're getting distracted by making comics and other stuff, Right.
And thank you for clarifying that because we see it all the time, folks, when whether it's life that happens or anything else with the production of a game and people don't hear from you right away, then they start wondering. So again, even in our last episode with Bruno, he mentioned simply how, hey, just let people know that stuff's still going on, even if you're busy or whatever, even if doesn't seem like much that they would care about, let them know. And so I love that you provided that distinction too, because it carries through with everything. It's like, hey, because if you're giving the signals that are like, hey, we're making a comic now, and then you don't hear anything, type stuff, like, well, now they're like, oh, now they're making comic books. And if you're a studio making...
You could totally trigger backlash among fans that have been waiting to get out of early access. And
And I think
that's a real concern.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at, don't look at resources just from the terms of time and money. Look at it also in the forms of transparency and communication. Because
and goodwill from your players. Goodwill from your players is a resource.
Yeah.
You don't want to squander it.
Exactly. And another thing I want to call out too is opportunities again. So when it came down to looking at this team, you're treating it as a separate project and stuff. And I want to call, I can't remember the episode number, but the one we had with the Game Bakers making, oh man, I can't think of the Boss Rush game or whatever, Fury. One of their main goals and focus was we want to reach out to the best, I think it was electronic musicians out there, because we think, and I think one of them, they reached out to Daft Punk, which I think they got turned down, but they're like, but we wanted to aim high and everything. And from the sounds of it, I'm not too familiar with the comic book industry, but I mean, you had a really high caliber team that put in all the efforts, and also you were seeking those opportunities. There was right opportunities, like the first gentleman you rented, the artist. He's just waiting for something, and you needed something, and the quality was there and everything else, and it was a good matchup. It was a great opportunity, and the reason why I'm calling out to these things too is because, one, if you're looking into a project like this, whether it sounds like something like a comic sounds very ambitious to you, or not, or even if it's something on a smaller scale, don't sell yourself short, guys. Look for those opportunities and see how they can align, and also meet at that high quality of standard, because clearly it's I know the comic just went to print at the time of this recording, but you really want to kind of set those standards higher than what you think you may, even if you think it's not possible to achieve, go a little bit higher. And it sounds like that's exactly the same process that you guys went through for this.
Yeah, and the key, one of the things I always look at is any problem that can be solved by networking instead of by throwing money at it. That's always a value. That's always the way to go if you can do it. And fortunately, I had this great network of, in the comic world of creators that I know, and and I've got a decent reputation there. So it's not difficult to coax someone into wanting to work on a project I've written. And it just just worked out. Everything just kind of fell into place. I said fell into place, but I waited 4 years for the opportunity where I could see the pieces positioned to fall into place.
Yeah.
It didn't just happen.
No, good point. Now, it's kind of funny. I'm looking through the questions I prepared here, and I'm realizing that there isn't too much more we've actually talked about from the gamification sides of things. I know you mentioned some stuff briefly, but I was hoping that maybe you could elaborate a little bit more some of the gamification aspects that the comic has. I think prior to us recording this right now, excuse me, you mentioned something about the covers, but earlier you did mention something about puzzles. Could you please just share a little bit more about what are the kind of those gamification aspects that the comic poses, and are there anything in the game that references the comic?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things we're doing with variant covers, we have 10 different covers of our first issue, is we're creating, every cover comes with an in-game reward.
Okay, cool.
It's a powerful artifact that is an Easter egg to wherever you bought that cover. One of the things that Black Caravan does is they set up store-exclusive deals, where a store will get, say 250 to 500 copies of your comic with a cover that only they have.
Nice.
And it works out well because they'll sell those for like $15 to $20 because they're limited edition. And, they paid $5 for them.
Yep.
So it's a good deal for stores and incentivizes them to, promote your comic. And at the same time, as the creator, it guarantees you several $1,000s in sales before you've even gone on sale to the public. So it's this really nice kind of safety net it works really well. And we wanted to take advantage of that. So what we do with the rewards is, and this was tricky because the game is on multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to figure out how to set up an in-game reward that's going to work on all the different platforms, you try to set up like codes. There's all kinds of, there's ways it can be done. But I wanted to do it without using, and again, this is separating the comic from the game. I wanted to solve the problem without using any engineering hours. I didn't want to have to pull any progress from the game, any forward progress in the game, to figure out how to do these in-game rewards. So one of the things we have in Epic Tavern in our narrative engine is the ability to check to see if a certain character is in the party at the time and branch the results if they are. So what we did with these covers is it's the instructions on the inside of the cover gives you the name of 4 heroes and the name of the quest to send them on. And if you send those 4 heroes on that quest in the game will check, it'll recognize all 4 there, and it gives you the special item.
Oh,
so it gives us this kind of workaround that we could do right within our existing engine. It didn't require any additional programming at all. Just some string command wrangling from me. And it incentivizes our players to go out and collect all the different covers, which is always nice, for all the different rewards. But it's the puzzle that I'm really psyched about. That's that's the big one to me. Because I would love that. If I was playing a game and suddenly there's this comic that I look through it and it tells me what to do in the game, and then I go do that thing in the game, and the storyline plays out completely differently because of it. And now I'm getting clues of where to look in the comic and putting together notes on, it's just, I love everything about it. I can't wait to get that part of it out to the public and let some of our players start digging into the puzzle, because it's just a great way to create engagement. And, like we mentioned earlier, it's a value add. We're not extracting anything. I mean, you know, we're kind of encouraging them to collect the variant covers. But the point of this isn't about that. That's not the big intent of it. That's just kind of a happy side effect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many levels I love about this. Like the main one, when you're just talking about having the different covers from not just a collection. So, okay, there's a lot to expound about here.
Yeah.
But like multiple covers, one from a collector standpoint, that's cool. That's a form of gamification, if you will, right? And also thinking about intent. You're not just thinking about the experience here too, in terms of the game with the comic, but you're also thinking about what the intent is with the distribution of the comic, meaning by having multiple covers that are exclusive to the store, you're also making the intent or incentivizing it for that distribution network for those comic book stores. So you're even adding value to the whole distribution process to those store sellers. So it's like, and the reason why I'm calling this out, everyone, is simply because sometimes, even though we have this initial intent and value, and it's always like player focused, but like for just very simple analogy here, that's a real life application. When you're reaching out to influencers, how are you? Ultimately, yeah, you're looking for more players by reaching out to them, but also how are you providing them with value?
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
people forget this.
Yeah,
you know, it's if you go to people with a mutually beneficial proposal, as opposed to asking a favor, you're going to get much better results.
Right. So
and it seems like such a basic thing, but it's overlooked so often.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's why I like having, Shawn, what you're sharing with us today about a comic, because in some cases, and I'm sure some of you might be thinking this, like, wait a minute, we're talking a lot more about comics than we are about game, but it all relates. Like the whole process and thought and what the ultimate intent and value are still relate. It's just by applying it in a different way. I'm at least hoping that we're able today to show you how you could be more creative in thinking of other opportunities and ways with your marketing.
Even the distribution itself, Scout gamifies that a little bit. One of the things that they're doing with our book is we have a variant cover that looks like an Atari cartridge. It looks like Epitavern made into an old Atari cartridge. It's beautiful. It's awesome. I love it so much. But you can't order it. You can't actually buy that cover on its own. It's called a chase variant, and what they do is they just randomly mix them in with store orders.
Oh,
like every
okay.
every 10th or 20th copy of the main cover that stores order will just be one of these, and they're just randomly shuffled in, and encourages readers to get out to stores and see if their local store happens to have any of the rare variants. Because they sell for the same price. They're the same $4.99 book, but they're actually worth $20.
Oh man!
So it becomes like this little kind of scavenger hunt sort of thing for readers who want to go collect these rare variants for the same price.
Okay, well, I can officially say I may have some insider intel here, because I already went ahead and requested this comic at my local comic book store. And knowing
Nice.
this, and I know the owner, and knowing this, I may be like, hey, dude, if you go through them, there's a different one. Could you set it aside?
let her know to see if we can stash the Atari Chase variant for you.
Yeah, right?
It's a great cover. We modeled it after the Adventure cartridge, the old Atari Adventure game.
Okay, sweet. But and one more thing, going back to what you shared about a few minutes ago, simply again, you mentioned about I did not want to take any resources from the development whatsoever. So you made that process in terms of like the puzzle and everything else, like all in game. It's almost like seamless. It's seamless. So in the sense of, there's like if a code was to pop up or something, or other information, let's say in game or whatever, that can really take players out of that experience. But now getting that information from the comic and making references to the comic, that whole the experience isn't ever, I would say, interrupted or
right. Yeah.
abruptly interrupted, which I think is just brilliant to do that, because so many times it's like, oh, look, here's a code to do something. Like, for example, the only thing that popped in my head right away, and I'm not complaining about this because I still like that this happened, but it's still abrupt. When I was playing Fez, And there's one part they're like, here's a QR code. And I was like, wait, what? I'm like, I need to get out my phone now and do something else. And that was an interruption to that experience. Was it cool? Of course it was. Like, I never saw that done before in a game. I'm sure it's been done before, but that was my first time experiencing it. And it took me out, and I was like, okay, whatever. But still, it did remove me from that experience, but in the case, just the level and degree of thought that was put into this to make sure that these things still stood on their own, and that, like, through the cross promotion, essentially, that they wouldn't interfere with each other either. It's just
and then it plays out organically in game.
Right.
You know, it's the reward happens in the story as well. It isn't just some external thing that happens. Like, I'll write an additional stage where you receive that item. It only plays out if you hit that. So it's not just this item just, randomly gets thrown at you. I work it into the story. There's a reason why you've been given this extra item.
Yeah. No, it's great. So thank you for sharing more about the whole, like, gamification side and how it actually really plays into the experience. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, I want to shift focus a little bit now and talk about kind of like, goals and risks type stuff, because I'm sure in general, like, taking on another big project and stuff, and I'm sure a lot of this was done anyways, but it's not necessarily, like, as we already identified, like, conventional. Like, this is kind of an outlier, if you will, because no one has really done something to quite this extent. But I was also curious. I mean, bottom line, yes, some sales are important, but I'm not focused on that. What I'm really curious about, outside of sales, what other goals were set for the comic book?
Just to make a great book. That's the only thing. Even more than sales. That was what I was working on. That's been my entire focus. Sales will take care of themselves. We're going through a real publisher. We've got some people behind. We've got players behind us on Epic Tavern. I've got a little bit of a reader base on my own. So we didn't have to be concerned about sales, really. We obviously wanted to do well and all that, but that wasn't our driver. Our driver was just to make something great. And we had the advantage of this being, like I mentioned before, a very low risk experiment. So we didn't have to compromise in the name of trying to sell stuff. We could just create what I thought would be the best experience, because I've been writing Epic Tavern full time for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I have, we have 160 playable heroes in the game, hundreds of quests, thousands of encounters. I mean, we just this mountain of story to pull from. And being able to just dig through that and find all my favorite pieces and all my favorite storylines and my favorite characters, and then just build something new from them. Not a straight adaptation of the game, but a new thing built out of the pieces of the game.
Yep.
And, and in terms of goals, another one just personally, I think Tales from the Fantastical Crimes Unit is begging for an animated adaptation. It's a Monster of the Week format. It has lots of funny characters. You could adapt our first issue basically shot for shot. That didn't happen by accident. And comic properties are being snatched up like crazy right now. Yeah,
I was going to say.
Including a few Black Caravan books that I edit have been snatched up for animated adaptations. So when I was going through all this pile of Epic Tavern storylines and stuff to figure out, what we should adapt, I was always super conscious of what storylines and what structure would also work as a TV series. And an overworked agency tasked with investigating crimes committed by mythological creatures is a solid series pitch. I totally watched that show. And by the flip side, a comic book called Epic Tavern that's set in a tavern and it's about running a tavern, that wouldn't be any good at all. That's not interesting at all. It's a fascinating concept for a game where you're running the fantasy tavern that engages your imagination and all that. But as a comic, not really. So we needed to find something that really lent itself to the medium. Find which story would be best for this medium, not just how do we shoehorn the story of Epic Tavern into another medium. Yeah. It's about how do we create something that is designed for this medium, exclusively. And I think that's important for writers anyway. And you get some backlash from this from some types of writers who kind of think that, identify themselves as I'm a novelist or I'm a comic book writer. And I look at everything. I don't view any of my stories as belonging to one medium. I always have an eye on adaptations. And Tales from the FCU was the most adaptable to both a comic and a TV series. I mean, it's just shovel ready.
What I really like, one key thing that I got here, and I'm being mindful of the audience listening from what you just shared here too, is because it sounds like at face value, it may sound like, oh, a comic book, and yeah, it's an adaptation, but it may just, it could be like completely different or whatever, because it's a different format and everything else, as you identified. But the key thing I got here, and this is something that's reoccurring on the show in terms of things that we talk about, is how are you repurposing things? Because basically that's ultimately what you did, but you're repurposing and then adapting in a different way, where now the comic makes sense. And because you said you had all this essentially source material to pull from, which had the framework in place, had a lot of the character, just basically had everything that it really needed in order to build upon within that format, make it within the comic, which made it probably a lot easier of a process, not to downplay that it probably wasn't a lot of work, but still a lot easier of a process than like starting from scratch, for example, and really pulling from that. And again, but being mindful of not a direct adaptation, because again, that might not be interesting, like going back to the intent and the value aspect of things. And
yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's looking at it from the reader's perspective before our perspective. If we lead from our perspective and say, okay, we want to adapt our game, then the way you do that is you make a one-for-one sort of adaptation of it. But is that the best thing for the audience? No.
Right. Yeah. And remember, folks, remember your audience. And on top of that, too, you made a simple, great comment, which was make something great. This is applicable to games, but you're applying it also to the comic, because what's one of the key things that come up in this conversation? Opportunities, right? Well, if you take the effort, and maybe it might be a little bit longer than what you would like to do, it's still important to implement, execute, and everything else. But if you lead with the focus or goal of making something great, you're already looking from a personal goal too. That would be awesome, and there could be that potential of, maybe it could be an animation series or something like that. But by making something great, you're also potentially opening up a lot of other opportunities too. So again, it comes back into to that whole kind of theme that we're seeing here a little bit in terms of opportunities. So really cool stuff there. I want to get into one more thing too, which was just talking about. Actually, I apologize. I'm kind of losing my place, because there's just so many awesome things that we're discussing here that I just I knew there would be a lot coming out of this. I didn't expect it would be to this degree. So it's
excellent. It's always good to hear.
It's just really awesome.
Yeah, I've been neck deep in this for a very long time. So it's interesting to be able to talk about some of it finally.
Oh, cool. Well, I guess one thing, and I know maybe there's anything else that we haven't talked about earlier, then I'd probably like to go into some lessons learned. How important would you say was it that both products enhance the experience for players and readers alike?
We hope that would be the case going in, but it's hard to articulate just how different it feels playing Epic Tavern after having read the comic. It's way beyond anything we had expected going in. It is greater than the sum of its parts by a wide margin. We were very much caught off guard. Our connection to the heroes from the comic is now cranked through the roof. Whenever we're playing the game and controlling those heroes, we get weirdly overprotective of them and crushed when something horrible happens. And it's not just the characters; it's these environments. Now that we've been able to, because most of Epic Tavern is text. It's a text setup. There's visual components and stuff, but most of the story is just words. And having now seen full illustrations of so many of these environments in the comic, like the Haunted Carnival, the Lost Menagerie, it just totally changes the feel of experiencing those storylines in the game. At the end of the day, Epic Tavern is an imagination engine. That's how we look at it. It's a storytelling engine, and where a lot of the action is text. You're sort of writing the story of your tavern and your ever-changing roster of heroes as you go. So shoveling all this new visual fodder fuel into the imagination engine has cranked it up to levels that we hadn't experienced. So much so that we're now looking for ways to use more of the comic art in the game itself. Initially, the game fed the comic, and now the comic's starting to feed the game. Where we're looking to do pop-ups, because we have all this great artwork of our story world now. So we'll do little pop-ups that show you the location, that you're entering with your heroes. And maybe like some little comic book cutscenes with some of the action. And one of the things we're super psyched about is that Steve Marto, the artist from the comic, will be doing hand-drawn portraits for all the characters in Epic Tavern.
Oh, okay.
So those will be displayed on their character sheets and when they're adventuring. And right now we have kind of automatically generated, 3D renders, based on the 3D model of the characters and stuff. And it's kind of bare bones. But having these actual hand-drawn portraits for all 160 playable heroes, it's just going to completely change the feel of them and your connection to those characters and your bond to them. So I mean, it wasn't the products enhancing each other. We really didn't know coming in what to expect. But now that this first issue is done, and we love it like crazy, kind of integrating some of the artwork and visual style of the comic into the game itself is just a super no-brainer. And that wasn't something we expected. It kind of caught us off guard. And again, it's just looking for opportunities. When we saw how much we loved the comic and how much great visuals were in there and how it affected our personal experience of playing the game, we're like, oh, we need to find ways to share that with players. Add that value to them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it too, because again, it goes back to kind of like, oh, well, we're really digging this right now, and it would be stupid not to repurpose this in the game, right? And now,
exactly.
and like you said, they keep feeding into each other, and it's still doing so in a manner that it's not disruptive. It's still seamless to the experience of whatever that medium is.
Yes, and neither has to compromise to do it.
Yeah,
that's the key thing. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's cool too, because like one thing you just shared as well is simply, we had some original ideas about stuff, but we didn't necessarily know exactly how it all play out. But as the projects continued, those things started to surface, and I guess what I want to say is you can't plan for everything. I mean, to an extent, you can have a vision, you can have some framework or plan to work from, but never expect that you have to follow to the T, because if you're doing that, you're not going to see all these other opportunities.
Yeah, and there will always be branches that pop up in the path in the process of making anything. And if you get too locked in on, okay, this is the design, this is the goal, this is what we're doing, these are our benchmarks, and boom, 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 and you get everything too locked in, you're just going to miss out on some great opportunities. Yeah,
definitely. All right. Well, before we close here, I want to shift into some lessons learned. And one thing I'm just curious about, because again, like, I think you were a great asset for the team because you just had so much experience in all these different areas. You've been involved on the project so long and everything else. But I would imagine that there's still challenges that came up. So were there any particular challenges that you faced throughout this project, and what were the ways that you overcame them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing easy about making comics. I swore after my last series ended that I would never run another series. It was just, I love the people I was working with, but it was just such a terrible experience all around because we didn't know what we were doing, and we made every rookie mistake. It didn't matter how hard we grinded because our model was wrong. So we just ended up running ourselves into the ground for nothing. But then 6 years go by, and in that time I edit maybe 150 comics. And I kind of study the art form and the market, and I've got a much better feel of things now. And suddenly I see this opportunity with Black Caravan and Scout to bypass all the pitfalls of my last series and do things right this time, and this opportunity shows up as I'm spending every day neck deep in an intellectual property as narratively rich as Epic Tavern. It felt okay. Let me quick tangent so that next reference makes sense. When I was a kid growing up in Maine in the 70s, one of our activities we would do in the early spring was called iceberging. And this is like as the frozen rivers were just starting to thaw out and move again, the water would be like densely packed with big floating sheets of ice of various sizes, durability, and speed.
Yep.
And the game was to cross the river Frogger style, jumping iceberg to iceberg, which required, obviously planning several moves ahead and kind of looking at how the landscape is shifting. And then you had to wait for the perfect opportunity and then just go without hesitation or you were doomed. So looking back at it, obviously stupid thing to do as a child, but it's become a lifelong visualization technique for navigating complex situations where I need to plan multiple steps ahead in an environment that's rapidly changing. And what it really comes down to with the comic is that through Black Caravan, I saw a clear path to the other shore, where we could expand our IP for almost no risk and what seemed to me legit potential gain. So I just started jumping, and that's really what it was. I'd been waiting for years and kind of watching the formation of the different ice flow and stuff like that. And suddenly I saw a clear path across. And that's when I brought it to HyperKinetic, and we just took it and ran.
Yeah.
So I think to circle back to your original question, the biggest challenge wasn't the unexpected hurdle that popped up or anything like that. I feel like I know where those hidden hurdles are because I've previously slammed into them. I have the scars to prove it. The main challenge has been the energy exertion required to kind of make sure everything develops on track and stays on track.
Yep.
10 covers means coordinating with 10 artists, a few colorists, the 10 stories you got to keep happy, plus the interior artist and the colorist and the letterist and the publishers and then promotion and on. I mean, it's a lot.
So, my follow-up to that then, because you're right, it is a lot. How would you keep that energy up and that focus and that vision?
Every time a new page comes in, I'm just dancing around like a kid at Christmas. I just because I've been writing these characters for years and never got to see them other than the kind of automatically rendered 3D model, which is it's a very different experience. But now I get to see these these characters that I love and that I created and I've been writing for years, and now they're like splashed out on the page and colored by the Ninja Turtles guy. It's just it's this phenomenal experience. But you have to really be cognizant of how much energy you're putting out, even when you love the work.
Yeah. Because
it'll drain you. I mean, it'll just, there's only so much in the tank. And kind of learning how to step back a little bit every now and then and recover is super important. And that's one of the things I've learned from HyperKinetic. Coming in when I first started with them, I had lots of bad writing habits. My biggest one was that I didn't believe in burnout because I'd always been able to just work and work and work and work, and I love it and everything's great and everything. But I didn't properly respect it, even though they warned me over and over again. You should probably slow down. Like, no, I love it. So I just, I'd wake up and I'd write 16 hours a day on Epic Tavern and go to bed and wake up the next day and do it again because I was having so much fun. But what I eventually learned the hard way, after ignoring all their good advice, was that burnout's real, and there's only so much you can do, and when you got to learn to realize when you're hitting that point, and just back away. Their kind of philosophy is that any hours worked over 40 are useless.
Yeah,
you hit a point of diminishing returns really around 30 or so hours of creative work, and anything after that, you're putting more energy in to get something that's not going to be as good out. So they've been really good about and Tomo Moriwaki, who's one of the co-founders of HyperKinetic, in particular, has been my mentor on this issue of getting me to slow down and take a break every now and then and relax, and not everything has to be a sprint. This is a long game, and we're going to be doing this for years. Just so that's been really helpful because my instinct was to sprint and crash. And what I've learned over the years is that you can cover a lot more ground at a steady jog than by sprinting and crashing repeatedly.
Yeah. No, perfectly said. And I love that you shared that too, because I think in general, when we all think about burnout, it could potentially come down to like, just crunching environments and stuff. But beyond that, like in your case, it was burnout from like energy exhaustion. It's like you always have all this energy and everything, and then it gets to a point where like, oh, like it crash, like you said. And even if you have that flow of energy and stuff, like just make sure like every person knows themselves, right? To an extent where doing that self-evaluation, be like, okay, could you put in a little bit extra effort? Oh, of course, you could probably always do it. But is it going to, pay you forward? Is it going to make what you're doing great? Well, and if you get that loss on return or whatever, just because you're putting that much more, you're not helping your project, you're not helping yourself. So I'm glad that you shared that, because I think sometimes we get carried away and we're so excited about something, and then it hits us and we would like, but we would have never expected that. I mean, that's essentially what happened to you. It sounds like I would never expect that. That's just how I am. And then,
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through a couple of those with Epic Tavern, where I just kind of hit a crash after like the, sprinting for months and months and months, where I just had like a month where I couldn't write for shit. Where just, just the stuff wasn't work because I had just expended so much energy that I would have to shift for a few weeks into design work, which I could still do when tired. Yeah. And kind of get away from a little bit more of the creative stuff and just let those tanks re-energize a little bit.
Awesome. Now, last lesson learned, and it's more of like just your overall thoughts about this. Now, while having resources and experience helps in executing these types of projects, what would you suggest for anyone that's looking to tackle a strategy and a project of this magnitude or something similar to this?
Bring in someone who's done it before. That's the big thing, particularly if you're doing a comic. Someone who has finished and shipped a comic and who knows the market, which are actually two very different things. There are lots of people who can make a good comic but don't know anything about selling them. If you try to just kind of instinct your way through making a comic, it can go all kinds of wrong. There's so many moving pieces and there's so many little things that if any one of them goes off, it just feels a little wrong when you look at the page. There's so many moving pieces. It's worth bringing on someone who knows where the landmines are, or you're going to find them the hard way. Or, if you have a budget, just call HyperKinetic and they'd probably farm me out to do it for you. And the other thing is that comic art is a visual storytelling language all its own. The fact that someone is an amazing 2D artist doesn't at all ensure that they'll be able to draw a decent comic. Their sequential art is a highly specialized skill. It's not something that you're probably going to execute well on the first try. So it's worth bringing people in who know what they're doing. And then the other thing is that unless you're creating a comic purely as a promotional item that's going to like ship with your game or something like that, you want to have distribution nailed down in advance. Self-distributing a comic is a full-time job. I've done it. It's awful. You don't want that. That's not a thing you want to be doing, especially as a game dev, because it will consume your whole life and give you almost nothing back in return. So leave the distribution to a company that knows how to move comics and get you on shelves, and you'll be much better off for it. And the advantage that comes with that is that if you're adapting a game that has an established player base or something that's expected to launch and have a base where you can bring your own audience with you, that certainly helps you in pitching to a publisher. The fact that we were a game adaptation, made this a no-brainer decision for Scout. Because, we weren't building our audience from scratch. We could kind of bring a little bit of juice with us.
Nice. Yeah. And again, I think that holds really true is if you're looking to do anything to that, to this level, definitely you got to look at people who have done it before, have that experience and everything. I mean, let's put it in a very simple term, like even with like companies as big as Google. Why do you think they buy out all these other little companies? Do you think Google can probably spend the time and resources to develop what these companies are doing? Probably. Do they want to? No, because
they don't have to.
Exactly. It's would be far more efficient to buy them out and then do their own thing as they see fit to it, compared to starting from scratch. Like, do they have the manpower, energy? They have everything that they need to do it, but they don't, because it's not effective. It kills time, and time is very valuable in those cases, especially when making those types of moves. But anyways, that was a simple.
If you could let somebody else kind of do all the kind of groundwork and iteration and failing at the ground level and concept level and stuff, and then just swoop in and grab the results that worked well. I mean, that's obviously a pretty good model.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, as we close, first I would love for you to share, I don't know, like your, because we discussed a lot here. There's a lot of good takeaways. Yes. What would your, let's say, top 3 suggestions or tips be for any indie devs, looking to maybe do something to this level or even something similar?
Sure. Okay. 3. So, I mean, obviously every situation is different. So these are just 3 things that kind of work for me. 1, keep an eye out for low risk opportunities to expand your IP in unorthodox ways. I think that's super, super, super important. You could almost put that as number 1, 2, and 3. It's a very important thing. Keeping your eyes open for unexpected opportunities is a good habit to get into. 2, be conscious of outside connections and seemingly unrelated skills that members of your team may possess. There might be opportunity space there.
Yep.
If HyperKinetic had not paid attention to the fact that I made comics, and that was just something they said, well, that's not games, and they just never paid attention to it at all, we wouldn't have a comic adaptation right now. It's because they were open to an opportunity space and interested in what the other skills of the people on their team have. And then 3, if you're heading into a new potential minefield, it's always worth bringing a guide.
Yep. Awesome. I couldn't think of 3 better ones there. And definitely in line with everything that we were talking about today. So thank you. Well, Shawn, this has been absolutely amazing. Again, I can't say how much like I was expecting a lot, but it still was way more than I anticipated. But before we go, which is amazing, but before we go, please share with people about just where they can find out where to get Epic Tavern, what they can do to pick up the comic, which again, the title of is Epic Tavern Tales of the Fantastical Crimes Unit, or FCU. And if there's a way people can connect with you, any information you can share where people can learn more about the game, the comic, and how to reach out.
Sure. We have set up a fan page on Facebook for Tales from the Fantastical Crimes Unit. You can search us there. We post detailed character profiles, lots of info on the series. We also have 7 more covers we're going to be revealing in the next week or so, including one that Scott Koblish of Deadpool did for us. Oh, sweet.
Nice.
Oh, it's so good. It's beautiful. I love it so much. The best way to reach us directly at HyperKinetic is through Epic Tavern's Discord channel. If you just do a Google search for Epic Tavern Discord, that'll bring you there. We host dev chats on Discord every Tuesday and Thursday, as well as Twitch streams on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Discord is also what we use for internal communication at HyperKinetic, so we're always on. I'm at my desk with Discord open 16 hours a day. So it is a very easy way to interact with us. And we have a lot of game devs who hang out in our Discord channel and come to us with questions, and we always love talking game dev.
Oh, sweet.
And then personally, you can find me on Twitter as the Shawn French.
Okay, sweet. And then also for Epic Tavern, that's currently available on Steam. Is it releasing soon?
Yeah, it's in early access, available on Steam or wherever you get your PC games. We're in most of the marketplaces.
Okay.
And then the comic is available for pre-order at your local comic book shop up until September 26th. So I don't know when this drops. You hear this after September 26th. You can still reach out to your stores and they can track down copies through Scout.
Yep. Yeah, and as I mentioned, I already did. And and here's the thing, everyone. The person, so the owner of the local comics bookstore I sent it out. I try to provide them with some comics too. I was like, hey, it's actually based off of a game and stuff. And his simple response was, well, just from what I can tell, just from seeing through the interface that he ordered it from, he goes, it looks really sick. And and this guy's always just kind of particular about what he gets, but he's also really focused on, hey, if people ask for it, he usually orders a bunch of copies. But the point was, like, even from how, like, and I'm sure this interface he looked at, it was very simple, had a tiny little image that he was looking at, but just from that alone, he thought it was really good, and I'm sure he's pretty excited to get just something new and different and exciting into the store too. So, well, Shawn, I can't thank you enough. Again, great episode, and glad that you were able to share all your insights with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.